The sky was the color of ash. It was late winter, the kind where snow falls without sound, thick and steady, softening every edge of the village. The roads were covered in white, the trees stripped bare, their limbs like arms raised in quiet surrender. On the hill above the town stood the old stone church. Its tall wooden doors had been left open after a funeral that morning, a small one, poorly attended. The priest had been called away suddenly, and in the confusion, no one had closed the doors. So the church waited, mouth open to the wind, while candlelight flickered inside. The nave glowed warm against the cold dusk, rows of candles burning down the altar steps, their flames dancing as they always had, until the deer came. It was not seen by many. A boy, home late from his grandmother's, saw it first, just a shape in the distance, moving through the snow without sound. He told his mother, who thought it nonsense. But she went to the window anyway and saw it for herself. It was a stag, tall and still and perfect. Not thin like the forest deer that sometimes came down to eat the orchard fruit. This one was broad, strong, its antlers clean, sharp, wide as branches. Its coat was dark against the snow. It walked slowly up the hill, step by step, not shy, not fast. It moved as if it belonged. When it reached the threshold, it did not pause. It did not sniff the door or hesitate at the stone. It stepped inside the church as though it had been invited. The boy said he saw the candles shift. Dozens of flames that had danced and flickered with the draft suddenly stilled, standing upright, frozen, as if they had been commanded to listen. The deer walked down the aisle, hooves soft on the ancient stone floor. Not a sound. Not even the creak of wood from the pews. Its breath curled into the air but vanished quickly. At the altar, it stopped. And every single candle flickered once, in perfect unison, and then held completely still. No movement. Not from flame, not from deer. The silence was so deep it felt like time itself had taken a breath and chosen not to exhale. The priest, who had returned just moments before, dropped his prayer book to the floor. It landed without a sound. The deer turned, walked back up the center aisle, and out the door. It vanished into the snow like a shadow being erased. The priest crossed himself, but no words came to his lips. For the first time in decades of service, he felt something greater than awe. He felt witnessed. By nightfall, the candles still burned, but none of them moved. Not even when the doors were shut. Not even when the wind howled down from the hills. And in the village below, no one quite slept the same again. The candles did not move. Even with the doors closed, even when the wind rose and rattled the windows, the flames stood perfectly upright, each one narrow, steady, frozen in form. No flicker, no tremble, not even the smallest sway from breath or breeze. The villagers noticed first in passing. A woman brought flowers to the altar and paused. She leaned closer, curious, and whispered to her daughter, "They are not real, are they?" But the heat was there. The light was warm. The wax dripped slowly down the sides. They were real. Just wrong. The priest noticed it too. Every morning, he lit the candles as he always had, taper by taper, wick by wick, and every morning they stood still as stone. He waved his hand near them. Nothing. He coughed once. Still nothing. Even when he opened both front doors wide and let the winter air flood the nave, the flames did not respond. It was not just silence now. It was silence with weight. The choir practiced in hushed voices. The bell tower rang only once a day. The usual joy of songs, of children rustling in the pews, of wood creaking beneath heavy coats, it all faded into stillness. And people began to feel it in their prayers. "Something's changed," an old man muttered. "I kneel, and it feels like the walls are listening. Not God. Not grace. Just the stones." The priest tried to carry on, but his voice faltered more often. The sermons, once fiery, now landed like snowfall, quiet, cold, and quickly gone. He tried to sing the psalms but found that even his own voice seemed to hush itself, as if embarrassed to echo. And through it all, the deer did not return. But its presence remained, like a breath held just behind every door. In the town square, mothers began to quiet their babies not with shushing, but with a glance toward the church. At the edge of the woods, hunters stopped taking shots near the hilltop. Even the dogs stopped barking as they passed the front steps. The church remained warm. The firewood burned. The candles glowed. But the flames no longer danced. And the villagers began to understand, something had followed the deer inside. Or worse, something had awoken when it passed through. By the third week, silence had grown strange. Not peaceful. Not holy. Wrong. It began during a baptism. The baby, small, red-faced, squirming, had every reason to cry. Cold water touched its skin. The crowd leaned forward, bracing for the familiar wail. But there was none. The child's mouth opened, its chest heaved, tears rolled down its cheeks, yet no sound came. Not even a gasp. Only the echo of water dripping back into the font. Mothers clutched their own children. The priest stared at the child, hands trembling. And all around, the candles glowed, still, watchful. Next, it was the bells. When they rang, the metal moved. The ropes pulled. The sound should have echoed through the valley like it had for generations. But the echo never came. The first toll was sharp. The second quieter. By the fifth, there was nothing but the creak of rope and the emptiness that followed. The sound seemed to fall into a hole. Even the birds no longer startled. And then came the collapse. It happened during morning prayers. A woman knelt in the front pew, whispering her rosary. Her fingers slipped. Her spine bent strangely. She fell sideways to the floor with a dull thud. But no one heard it. Her neighbor in the next pew didn't turn. The priest didn't pause. It wasn't until a child pointed that anyone noticed her lying there, her mouth faintly open in confusion, not pain. The priest rushed forward. The floor beneath her was cold. She was breathing, but limp. When she tried to speak, her voice made no sound. Her lips moved, but no word came. Later, in bed, she whispered hoarsely, "It felt like falling into a place where sound is forbidden. Like my breath didn't belong there." She would never enter the church again. And still, no deer returned. Yet the feeling, of something having walked through and left the door open behind it, remained. The fox came next. Drawn by the scent of mice, it crept in one night through the open side door left ajar for ventilation. Its paws tapped gently across the stone floor, its nose twitching. But once inside, it froze. The silence wrapped around it, not the silence of safety, but of absence. It heard nothing. Not even its own footsteps. No pads against stone. No breath in its lungs. It turned quickly, left in a panic, and never came near the church again. Even the forest had begun to whisper, "Something is awake in there. And it does not want to be heard." Not all things forget. And the forest never does. Beneath the hush of snow-laden trees, in hollows of roots and dark bramble tunnels, the animals spoke in tones too soft for human ears. Their voices were clicks, rustles, wing beats. But meaning carried. Always did. The crows, who had once perched on the church's stone spires, now gathered further from the hill, in the crooked arms of dying elms. They would not land on the bell tower. Not anymore. The deer went where it should not have gone, one muttered, feathers fluffed against the cold. Another replied, "No. It went where it had to. Where none of us dared." In the burrow beneath the roots of an old birch, two badgers whispered between yawns. "It walked the stones without a sound," said one. "Not the stones above," replied the other. "The ones below." And somewhere deeper, near the frozen stream that wound like a silver thread through the woods, the owl stirred in his hollow. His eyes, round and ancient, opened to the night. He had seen much. Longer than most remembered. "The church is young," the owl said to the wind. "But the hill is old." He spoke not to anyone in particular, and yet all nearby creatures seemed to still at his voice. Long before the candles, he said, there were fires in pits. Before the hymns, there were chants in a tongue older than birdsong. Before the altar, there was a stone, flat and cold, where nothing was spoken. Only watched. The fox, now recovered from his brush with silence, listened from a distance. The owl turned his head toward the village lights, barely visible through the branches. "The deer walked through the church," he said, "because it remembered what lies beneath it. What was buried, not forgotten. And now." He paused, blinked. "Now the silence remembers too." Even the trees seemed to lean in, their branches creaking like old bones settling. "It was not a curse," the owl explained. "Not exactly. It was a reawakening. A silence that had once ruled this hilltop long before walls were raised and bells forged. The deer did not bring it. The deer simply reminded it. And reminders, like hoof prints in snow, may melt, but they do not vanish. He could not sleep. For weeks now, the priest had tried to carry on as if all was well. He lit the candles each morning. He prayed over empty pews and trembling voices. He kept his sermons short, careful, quiet. And yet the silence lingered like incense, thick, inescapable, sacred in a way that felt older than Scripture. On the 5th Sunday since the deer, he stayed behind after evening mass. The doors closed softly behind the last parishioner, and the wind outside stilled. It was then that he did what he had not dared to do since the beginning. He sat in the center aisle, cross-legged on the cold stone floor, and removed his collar. "I have served you my whole life," he whispered. "But now I feel I am not the one being served." No reply. The flames stood still. Even the draft beneath the altar cloths didn't sway them. He exhaled slowly, and then, as if speaking not to God, but to the silence itself, he asked, "What have I forgotten?" The words, spoken aloud, felt heavier than any sermon. They echoed once, then stopped. The room held them close, as if unwilling to let them go. And then the candles flickered. Not wildly. Not all at once. Just a single ripple of motion, like breath returning to a body. And suddenly, he saw. Not with his eyes, but in memory. In something older than memory. A vision pressed into his mind like a thumbprint into soft wax. Stone laid atop stone in a time before names. Men standing in a circle, heads bowed, not speaking. Fires burned low in pits, not for warmth, but as witness. No words were shared, not because they had none, but because none were needed. There, on the hilltop, they buried their dead in silence. Not out of grief. Out of respect. Because they believed the dead were listening. Because they believed names, once spoken aloud, could wake things not meant to rise. The priest saw the ancient flat stone buried beneath the altar. Saw how the church had been built atop it like a mask over a mouth. And he understood. The hill did not want prayers. It wanted quiet. Not hymns. Not sermons. Just memory. The deer had not cursed the church. It had reminded it what it once was. When the priest came back to himself, the candles had stilled once more. He stood, knees aching. Walked slowly to the altar. Placed both hands upon it. "I hear you," he said, not aloud, but in his heart. And the silence softened. It snowed again that night. Soft, thick flakes fell in silence, blanketing the village in white. The hilltop church stood quiet as ever, its bell tower half veiled by morning mist. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney above the rectory. The priest awoke early. He hadn't intended to, the sleep had been deeper than usual, but something stirred him. A pressure in the air. A calm too complete. He dressed in silence and stepped out into the soft crunch of new snow. The village below was still sleeping. No boots had yet carved paths into the drifts. But as he climbed the short walk to the church door, his breath caught. There, just before the threshold, at the exact place where the deer had once entered, was a single hoof print in the snow. Only one. Sharp-edged. Deep. Fresh. Not a trail. Not a path. Just one mark. The priest knelt beside it, fingers hovering above the indentation. He didn't touch it. Didn't dare. He looked up at the door. Closed. He unlocked it gently and stepped inside. The air was different. Still silent, yes. But no longer oppressive. No longer listening. The candles, dozens of them along the altar, inside niches, behind the choir stalls, burned as always. But today, for the first time in weeks, the flames moved. Slightly. Naturally. Like breath. A flutter. A pulse. The silence had not left. But it had eased. Later that day, the villagers came as they always did. Some brought food. Others brought prayer. Some came only to sit. And when they stepped through the church door, they felt it too. Not warmth. Not joy. But balance. A kind of peace that had not been earned, only returned. When the first woman dared to sing again, it was not a hymn, but a lullaby. And she sang it softly. To no one. Just to fill the space with something gentle. The flames danced. Spring arrived slowly that year. The snow took its time leaving, as if reluctant to release the village from its quiet grip. Buds appeared along branches, cautious. The creek behind the church began to run again, shy at first, then clearer, stronger. And through it all, the silence remained. Not the heavy, unnatural stillness that followed the deer. That had passed. What lingered now was different, a deeper quiet. One that felt earned. The priest never spoke of the hoofprint to anyone. But each morning, he paused at the doorway before entering, eyes drifting to the ground, even when the snow was gone. He would nod once, softly, before stepping inside. The villagers, too, had changed. They still came to Mass. Still sang. But their voices were lower. Their prayers shorter. No one shouted anymore. No one slammed doors. Even the laughter in the square felt gentler. Children played in the yard behind the rectory, but they didn't run too close to the church walls. As if they, too, sensed something sacred in its stones. And though the deer was never seen again, stories of it never faded. In time, they carved its image into the side of the church, a single deer, mid-step, walking down the center aisle. Not regal. Not glowing. Just present. People called it a sign. A reminder. A visitation. But the forest knew better. The owl still watched from his hollow. The fox still gave the church wide berth. And in the roots beneath the hill, old memory curled around stone, not sleeping, not waking, simply waiting. For silence, like fire or water, never disappears. It only changes hands.